Bill was a young pharmacist working in a drugstore with two other pharmacists. One was a chief pharmacist, the other was a middle-aged woman pharmacist. The chief pharmacist was retiring and offered Bill the position of chief pharmacist. Now, Bill was flattered, but he was also aware that the woman pharmacist was an excellent pharmacist and had been there many more years than he had. When he voiced his concern, the chief pharmacist said, "Well, she's married and she doesn't need the money as much as you do." Bill turned down the promotion, and he told the chief pharmacist his reason was that he felt it was unjust to promote him over the woman pharmacist. Well, he got fired. It took him a while before he found another job, but when he did, and when asked if he would do it again, he didn't hesitate. "Of course I would," he said. "I have two young daughters, and I don't want them to grow up in a world with this kind of injustice." Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15th, 1820. She was an American social reformer and a women's rights activist, and she played a pivotal role in the women's suffrage movement. She was also an anti-slavery activist, and during the Civil War, she and another woman founded the Women's Loyal National League, and they conducted the largest petition drive in the United States history up to that time, collecting over 400,000 signatures in support of the abolishment of slavery. After the war, they initiated the American Equal Rights Association, which campaigned for equal rights for women and also for African Americans. Soon she began working on the right for women to vote, and in 1872, she was arrested in her hometown of Rochester, New York, for voting in violation of laws that allowed only men to vote. She was convicted in a widely publicized trial, and although she did not live to see it, her grassroots efforts eventually led to the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, giving women the right to vote in 1920. So let's put all this in biblical terms. Bill the pharmacist, Susan B. Anthony were prophets. Like Jeremiah, they each took a stand for justice, and they each paid a price. Often, prophets are met with rejection, even amidst their family and their friends. Bill recounts that after he had made that decision and after he got fired, people would dispense with the niceties when they met him. It wasn't, "Bill, how you doing? How are your kids doing?" Anything like that. It was, "Why in the world did you do that? Why did you give up that extra pay? It doesn't make sense to me. Did you think about your family?" This is exactly what Jeremiah is doing in our first reading. He is hurt, and so he cries out to God, "You duped me, Lord, and I let myself be duped." And then he continues, "I am an object of laughter. Everyone mocks me." Now, some of you might say, "Well, you shouldn't talk to God that way," as if we're afraid we might hurt God's feelings, or that God might somehow become angry with us and leave us. But that's not what Jeremiah thinks. This great prophet encourages us to voice our minds to God, to blow off steam, if you will, to voice even our discontent at times with God. Because what this allows us, it allows us to keep the lines of communication open with the very one who created us to be prophetic to begin with. That's the situation Jeremiah finds himself in. He's not by nature a courageous man. Being a prophet is not easy, and it cost him a lot. He is arrested and shackled outside the temple. He is laughed at and mocked by the very people God has sent him to challenge. Prophetic voices like Bill the pharmacist, prophetic voices like Susan B. Anthony, prophetic voices like Jeremiah remind us that the role of prophet is not easy. In fact, it's usually pretty hard. But prophetic voices are needed today as much as ever. Those who speak out for the life of the unborn, those who speak out for the plight of immigrants, those who pray at penitentiaries where executions occur, and those who speak out against the treatment of the LGBT community, even within our own church. Many times, prophets like Jeremiah can't help themselves. When they experience God's call, they can't help but follow it. You are too strong for me, Jeremiah says. You are too strong for me, Lord, and you triumphed. God's word, he says, was burning in my heart, imprisoned in my bones. One of the lessons that I think we can learn from people like Bill and Susan and Jeremiah is to listen quietly for the call of God deep within ourselves, and to ask ourselves, as St. Paul talked about in our second reading, are we conforming ourselves to this present age, or are we being transformed by the renewal of our mind? And when we answer that question, then we can respond to God's call, even if there are costs. Have you ever had to take an unpopular stand like Jeremiah or Bill or Susan because you just knew it was the right thing to do and then had to pay a price? Perhaps you lost a friend. Maybe you lost the respect of somebody you respected. Maybe even you became alienated from your own family. In our first reading today, Jeremiah is a good example of what it means to be the bearer of God's word, even when that stand is unpopular. It cost us to be prophets. It can cost us emotionally. It can cost us spiritually. Sometimes it can cost us financially. But as we hear in the gospel, prophecy doesn't stop with the Old Testament. Indeed, Jesus challenges us to be willing even today to take up our cross and follow him, to be prophets even today in his name. And just as it led Jesus to the cross, so too it might lead us to unpleasant situations so that the people of God might hear the fullness of God's love in this world. Responding to Jesus in our daily lives will cost us. Bearing that in mind, let us remind ourselves of the word of the psalmist in our responsorial psalm today. My soul is thirsting for you, O Lord my God, because being connected to God in all things and in all ways will allow us to pick up our cross and follow him.